Really.
Awesome. We got the green by greens, Vlad.
Good.
Okay, awesome. Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. You may see up above me a very familiar face. A very familiar face. Ooh, I can talk. This is gonna set us up well for success. But you guys might see a very familiar face. We've got Vlad back. Vlad, as he may talk about a little bit later, is coming back from vacation only for this conversation, right? He was thinking about, I might just move to the beach, I might have no cell phone service, but I'm going to come back to have this conversation for the adoring fans of Manufacturing Hub. But no, we are very excited to have you. You want to wave and say hi to everyone, Vlad?
Hey guys, hi everyone.
Awesome. We're excited to conclude August, as we've been calling it, a little bit of a potpourri of various different themes. We've been having a bunch of roundtables. So we've been loving the roundtables. All of our guests have been loving the roundtables. All the comments make it seem like you guys are loving the roundtables. So if you guys are enjoying the roundtables, please let us know. We're looking at potentially adding some more of those into the flow and into the mix as we continue. As we go through, again, we want to thank Phoenix Contact for sponsoring August and for all of the amazing community support that they've had. And for everyone who has missed the last couple of weeks because I haven't embarrassed Vlad, to start us off, I'm going to go ahead and embarrass Vlad, right? So Dave, Max, I don't know if you know, but Vlad runs a very successful YouTube channel called Solus PLC, right? We're getting really close to 33,000 subscribers. We are currently live streaming through Solus, so I like to wave to the couple hundred people who come to watch us. Thank you guys for doing that. If you're not subscribed to Solus PLC, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And I ask people for that because then we get to take all the credit for Vlad's successes, because Vlad doesn't ask people to subscribe, and they've been growing steadily. I don't know.
Thank you, Dave.
Causation, correlation. Luckily, that is not the conversation we are having today. Absolutely, Vlad. We are happy to have you guys back, or happy to have you back. If you missed any shows, you guys want to learn more, please check us out at manufacturinghub.live, where we've got the last almost 75 episodes all up and running. You guys can check out the podcast that drop on Thursdays, all of the information that drop on Wednesdays, and you guys can go join the mailing list where we'll send you a reminder about an hour before we go live. With that, let's go ahead and jump in. Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub with me, Dave, and this guy up here, Vlad. We have made it to episode 76, and we have an operational excellence roundtable featuring Max Krug and David Crysler. Max, Dave, welcome to the show. Thank you guys for being here.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. So we are going to let Vlad do some emceeing of this, but first I wanted to make sure that we allowed Max to reintroduce himself and Dave to introduce himself. So Max, would you mind introducing or reintroducing yourself to the listeners of this show?
Okay, Max Krug. My background's in manufacturing. Spent most of my career in manufacturing, a little bit of distribution, education's in industrial engineering. Spent my whole career, working on continuous improvement stuff. Went off on my own in 2005, then sort of rebranded myself in like 2017 as Future State Engineering, because I was tired of doing point solutions, and it's like, well, we can actually engineer what your future state looks like. So my organization now, what we do is we help companies create that blueprint of what their future state, what they want it to be, and help them achieve that.
That is amazing. I will shout out, Max and I have a show together called On the Shoulder of Giants, and we're getting ready to launch batch 2, where we've got 5 or 10 episodes coming out talking about all of the tools that you can use for operational excellence. So thank you for that, Max. David, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Crysler, and I own a operations consulting business called the Crysler Club. And, we work with business leaders in the manufacturing space specifically to create systems to help them drive growth and operate with excellence. And my background is more than 20 years in manufacturing operations leadership roles, held various operational leadership roles and P&L responsibilities for multiple facilities, including, ERP implementations, continuous improvement, lean manufacturing, kind of all things that we're talking about today. So excited to be here with you all, and looking forward to the conversation.
Really
Fantastic.
appreciate you both joining us today. I wanted to throw maybe an easy but first question at the two of you. So, operational excellence. My assumption is that most of the listeners are going to be familiar with the term, but could you give us maybe a definition of what it means for you, and what have you seen, I guess, in really in your experience as far as operational excellence goes?
Yeah. Max, you want to jump in? You want me to?
Yeah. So I thought the first question was going to be easy. So this is an easy question.
They
How
only
much
get
time
harder
do we
from there.
have here?
There you go.
So I'll try to summarize quickly how I define it, and then Dave can add his comments. So really what I do is the way I define it is it all starts with the customer needs. And so we understand what are the needs of the customer, and those are inputs into our organization, and we really design the organization to achieve those needs of the customer. So it's I don't have a true definition of it's this, and this, but it's focusing on the customer needs, designing the internal systems and processes to support those needs better than our competitors or better than what the customer can get from a substitute product or service. That's my elevator speech for operational excellence.
David, thoughts, ideas?
Yeah, I think what I would add to that, I mean, I completely agree with where you're at with it, Max. I mean, what I would add to that is, when I think about operational excellence, it really comes down to starting with that, from the customer perspective, right? And how do we create that value? But internally, what I like to look at are the systems, the processes behind those systems that ultimately impact two things: the culture of your organization and profitability, because those are the two kind of lifebloods of what we're doing. So what it means to me to operate with excellence is that you have developed systems that not only deliver value externally, but that deliver value internally to your team through culture and through profitability. So return to shareholders.
Yep.
Absolutely.
ask-
I was
Go
going to
ahead,
say,
Dave,
if I may go ahead and add on, right? So I certainly come to operational excellence much more through the automation space, as I would imagine many of our listeners are, right? So I think of operational excellence as the people and the process side of the people process technology kind of offerings, and what we as automation and manufacturing very much talk about, right? So it's creating a system within your entire organization so you can be successful, and then creating systems within that so that people can go and do the best jobs that they possibly can. And as from the technology side, I came to operational excellence because we go deliver a theoretical piece of technology, and I've seen most of the training is an engineer is typing engineering PowerPoints on their laptop while you're driving to site on the last day to go give a 20 PowerPoint, presentation of, okay, this is how you use the system we spent the last 2 years building, right? And so that is a miss. But then on the other side, it's also, how do you pick the correct pieces of technology? And when I say pieces of technology, to some extent, PLCs are PLCs and hardware is hardware. But when we talk about different software packages, when we talk about a SCADA or an MES, maybe you even talk about, what are the correct HMI? What software should we use to scale across the organization? And then certainly when we talk about ERP or other much larger conversations, that's when we need to look at what best serves and what best fits the organization, as opposed to picking something and trying to pick the choice that we have throughout the organization. So I've seen lots of misses on that. And from my perspective on the automation manufacturing side, when I talk to those folks, it's very much kind of the people and the processes that help the groups and the technology succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to add, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave.
No, I was just going to add to that. I mean, I think to kind of put that into a bucket, Dave, what I end up seeing is when you hear the word business systems, right? Or systems as we often refer to it, almost everybody's immediate thought is technology. And, when we break that down, and we were talking before we got rolling, it's the planning, people, process. Technology is included in that, right? It's the 4 key pillars, I call them, but technology is at the end of that, and they all have to work together. That's the system, right?
Yes.
you layer in the technology, and so I wanted to add that because I think there's a lot of confusion just in general when you talk to people. What's a system, and then you hear, well, what's a process and a system, and how do all those things work together? They work in unison. Those four things work in unison to develop and create these systems that ultimately allow you to grow, to operate with excellence, to reduce waste, and improve quality, and fill in the blank, right?
Mhm.
And I
Could we
always looked
maybe
at
have a
technology
go ahead,
as
Max, go ahead.
I looked at technology as an enabler, right? It's not the silver bullet. It's not the solution. It enables us to get to the next level.
Yeah.
But if it's not applied correctly, it's just going to create more problems.
Yeah. That's a great point, because you can utilize, I like that word specifically, Max, because you can utilize it positively and negatively, right? Because it really can go either way depending on what specific thing we're talking about. So
Can we maybe break down the four pillars? I think that would be an interesting conversation to have as well. And I would maybe reiterate the sentiment coming from an automation background is that you hear a lot of, I want to say, different, more like tools rather than methodologies. Or you hear about like Lean Six Sigma, you hear about like sampling of your process, you hear about systems. For an automation engineer, a business system does not necessarily translate to what is applied to the whole business, but rather maybe, as Dave mentioned, like a PLC and HMI. So I think there's a lot of maybe confusion or overlapping wording. Could you break down the operational excellence pillars for us, and so we can maybe dive into each area at least a little bit?
yeah, yeah, I'm happy to take that. I mean, from my standpoint, when I talk about those things, it's planning, people, process, and technology. And I always say it's in that very specific order. And each one serves its own very specific function. The planning cycle can be at multiple points throughout the creation and improvement of the system. But when it comes down to it, business systems are really created through planning and people. Okay, and they involve process and technology. So
Yep.
to me, that's the best way to kind of define and break all of that down. And how do they work and play together? I'll leave it up to everybody else to jump in.
And
Max?
also, I look at it as you look at the organization as a system, right? So a system is a combination of interdependent and interrelated processes. So if we don't understand how those processes interrelate and are interdependent, right, then we start to put in sub-optimization or subsystems, right, because the process isn't working correctly. So one of the indicators I look at when I go into companies is when they're having problems is like, what subsystems have they put in place? Oh, I got my little spreadsheet over here where I keep my own data because the ERP never gives me what I need, right? That's a subsystem.
It only took 13 minutes for Excel to come up.
Let me ask a question on that, like, last thought, right? So I obviously like understand that there's a need to document and understand your own systems, but in your experience, how good are the, I would say, like, manufacturers at doing that, right? Like, so when you show up to a site and you most likely as a first step ask them, well, have you started with the process of mapping your entire like product flow, or it could be any like subsystem,
Mhm.
or the entire business. How good is that model usually? And like, what's, I guess, like, if I'm trying to understand like the next step
Mhm.
also, like, what does it truly take to maybe get to a good position, right? Just understanding our business.
From
Yeah.
my experience, the first time I do a map like that, I use value stream mapping as a technique.
Mhm.
It's probably the first time anyone's ever looked at the organization as a system.
Mhm.
That's my experience. I'd like to hear what Dave's experience is.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Max. And here's what ends up happening. I find most often, right? You ask the first question that you did, Vlad. Do you have all your processes documented? When's the last time you've kind of developed the value stream map? Those types of things, right? So that's question number one. And inevitably, people say, "Oh yeah, yeah, here's all my documentation." So my next follow up question is always, when's the last time it was audited? right? Because that is the real meat behind it. And whether it's an internal audit or an external audit, by engaging, folks like us, that's really, where the rubber meets the road, because it doesn't matter what's been documented. What matters is what's happening on a day-to-day basis.
Yep.
And if there's no audit trail behind that, and they can't answer, oh, we have it on a quarterly audit schedule or whatever it happens to be, then kind of what you're dealing with. And then you can start to work towards, all right, to Max's point, well, let's start with the value stream map. Then we're going to have to break down and start getting into some, more detailed process mapping. We're going to have to be looking at what the KPIs are telling us to say, where are areas of improvement throughout this. And people usually have a feel for those types of things, but yeah.
And Vlad, if I may kind of add on, I think to your initial question, are how good are manufacturers at this? In a word, terrible, right? I would say generally that they're very bad, but that's because they've never gone through, one of these exercises in the past. Perhaps they almost certainly don't understand their business, or at least their floor, their plant as a system. And even if you go look at specific subsystems, right? So I'm doing a project, or I was doing a project with a very particular company, right? So they have a filler, and they have a bunch of issues with downtime on just that particular section of the line that's part of a much larger, chunk of their organization, right? So it's a core component, but it's, 1/100th of the organization. And we were going to do some troubleshooting work. And so as part of that, I'm like, okay, how many, pieces of machinery are there, right? So there are 10 pieces of machinery. And I'm like, okay, how many sub pieces or sub pieces of machinery are there, or systems on there? And they're like, oh, we have no idea, right? And literally, well, actually, the first answer was 60 or 70, right? So there was a very particular answer, and I'm like, wow, what are the odds it's a round number like that? This is awesome. We'll go block diagram it out, and then we can do some troubleshooting and training based upon that. And then it's like, well, these are kind of estimates, right? There are like 7 pieces times 10 subsystems. That gets us to about this number. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is going to be so much work. So typically, and like, as I'm sure we'll talk about, there are systems, but each piece of machinery is a system in and of itself, and it is very difficult to, at the core, troubleshoot what the problem looks like if we don't understand what the system that is the machine, or the system that is the line, or the grouping of machines look like.
Yeah.
And I want to,
oh, go ahead, Max.
I wanted to piggyback on what you said, Dave. So I agree. It's like they have the documented procedure, and then what happens is we get so far deviated from that. So a key element of the operational excellence is the link between people and process. We need to build accountability into the process. So when I say that, a lot of people don't know what that means. But if we build accountability into the process, we stop that process of continually deviating, and then we're way off target, and then we don't get the results. We're like, why are we getting results? Because the processes that we designed aren't being executed the way they were planned, right? So that's the linkage.
Yeah. And then, for most people in that space, right, from an operations leadership standpoint, the easy thing to go to is we have a people problem, right?
Yep.
How many times have you guys heard things like, well, these people out on the shop floor, they don't know what the heck they're doing, right?
If they would just care, right?
Exactly. And the other thing I wanted to tack on to Dave, what you were saying, and kind of goes back to Vlad, how you started the question, but most of these organizations, and I've kind of found it doesn't necessarily follow a revenue band, but most of the manufacturing organizations kind of run on triage. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I think is the root cause behind, that deviation that Max, you talked about. It's just a consistent level of triage. And until you start to take a look at your business like a system and start to diagnose the problems systematically, then you're going to continue to be in this triage exercise. So, I think that's where it all stems from, at least from my experience.
Let me ask you maybe a clarifying question on that last statement, plus what Dave was mentioning on the filler project. How do these conversations initially start? And I guess like my thought is, are manufacturers looking at a specific piece of machinery and like, this is something that's running terribly, we're looking for someone to look into it and improve it? Are they looking at the whole business? Maybe we're looking to grow and get to the next level of, productivity in our specific line. How do these questions or initiatives come to be or to originate, I guess?
Yeah, from my perspective, what I've seen is, it's kind of very specific focus. So some sort of KPI is triggered the, hey, we have an issue over here and we need to start having some conversations around it. But typically those are going to be symptoms that people are seeing. It's not, nowhere near what the real problem is and nowhere near what the root cause of it is. So it's, peeling back that onion, so to speak. But it typically, at least in my experience, starts with some pretty specific pain point based around a KPI that they've measured to say, hey, boy, we're spending a lot of money on rework. Why is that? So those types of things.
And I would agree 100%, Dave. It's the two things I see is lack of looking at their organization as a system, and then being able to do root cause analysis and problem solving. Those two things alone, it's like people just struggle.
And so somebody, I guess, like if I understand that correctly, needs to ask like a certain question, right? Otherwise, they could be having a chronic issue that's unresolved for years, if not decades, right? Which is probably what is being experienced in a lot of cases, right? It's just no one's really looking at the right place to even ask that question, even though it may not be the root cause, but it's still a present indicator that something is, I guess, wrong.
Yeah, because
go ahead, Max.
I was trained by Dr. Goldratt, and so Dr. Goldratt said, "What's the definition of an expert? It's a person that can ask the right question."
Yeah, 100%. And what I would equate that question to, Vlad, is you've heard a lot of people talk about the Great Resignation, right? Mm-hmm. And when I look at what are the symptoms, we see turnover, we see those types of things, the Great Resignation. But when you start to dig back, what do we uncover? We uncover leadership that doesn't necessarily effectively communicate. We find a lack of systemization, a lack of culture and engagement and empowerment. Those are all things that systems and creating effective systems can resolve. Yep. Yet we say things like, well, I just can't find anybody good to work here. Like the government keeps people on payroll, so of course nobody wants to go back to work. And while those things may be true in, kind of a very narrow window for people and things, by and large, that's not the issue. By and large, people are tired of working for bad bosses, and that's not changed. People just now have a voice for that. So the problem has always been the same problem. We're just choosing to ignore what the real problem is and then addressing it. And we're masking all of that in things that make us feel better by saying things like, we can't find people to work. Nobody good does any, nobody does any good work out on the shop floor. They're always messing stuff up.
Yeah, if they would just pay attention, we wouldn't have these problems.
And then the shop floor is, well, if they just pay me $5 an hour more, I would pay attention. No, it's all based on the system. The system has provided a way for you to skirt the system and not follow the process. And, from a leadership standpoint, you are not investing in that infrastructure to eliminate waste, to reduce error, and to, mistake proof the process.
I think it was Deming that had a quote that said, "The system is designed perfectly to give you the results that you're getting."
It was him, and that's 100% true. It was. So.
I love this. I'd like to add in a couple more different ways. So I again see lots of, I don't know, it almost starts at a point solution or pain solutions, and you go and you dig in to do some root cause analysis, and you find an operational excellence opportunity. I would say additionally, and I think I've had this conversation with both Dave and Max and Vlad separately, I think that there are lots of companies that are currently turning over, right? So whether ownership groups or private equity or second or third or fourth generation are taking over, and they look at it and they're like, this doesn't seem right. So I think that there are certainly lots of opportunities as we change over ownership leadership to take a larger look at the organization in and of itself. I think we're also seeing a lot of new money. So startups. I don't know. In the last month, I think I've talked to half a dozen different quote unquote like startup or small manufacturing companies that have lots of VC private equity bank money, and they're going to do something, right? Because they think that there's opportunities in manufacturing, be it food or otherwise. Especially you see a lot of contract manufacturing kind of moving in that direction. So I think that as we have new money, new people coming in, there'll be lots of rethinking, especially if ownership leadership really cares about the organization and goes in and buys the company and has lots of conversations and asks them what's going well, what's going poorly. And if they do, then I think we'll see a lot more people kind of moving towards what we're calling operational excellence, whether it's through someone in this conversation or they go read a couple of books and say, hey, we should go look at it as a system, or hey, we should go create accountability and cultures of respect and kind of those things. And I think that will help alleviate a bunch of issues. I guess in my experience, and to Dave's point of the great resignation, good people work for good bosses, whether they're almost never getting paid above or at top of range, but good people stay with good bosses. If you are a bad organization, you could pay twice what the going rate is, but you're going to lose people as quickly as you can find them because there's no amount of money worth putting up with the stress and struggle of a bad boss and a bad organization and no standard procedures and constant struggle between the carpeted and the uncarpeted spaces in manufacturing and kind of all across industrial facilities.
I would agree. I do want to ask a question based on a statement, David, you made, and I will steal that saying, peeling back the layers of the onion, right? And so uncovering the problems maybe that even Dave just mentioned, what would you, I guess, recommend thinking about it like a manufacturer that is aware that there is a problem, right? But maybe is not ready to pull the trigger for an external consultant just yet, and is trying to just get like the basic, I want to say, like steps in place to at least figure out what the problem is to, again, like the best of their ability. And like also maybe like a slight tangent question to that one question is also how, I want to say, broad and how deep do you want to go, right? And the example that Dave mentioned before on the filler, I could certainly, as an automation engineer, imagine myself trying to implement a lot of like fault codes that are going to be passed into a database, and that's all stored. There's a lot of data that we're now collecting, but what are maybe the higher level steps before we get to that level? And then how do you maybe systematize would be the word, get to the root cause without necessarily getting lost in the weeds, so to say?
Yeah, I mean, great question. And when I think about it, the key really comes down to empowering and engaging people, people that are closest to the process. As you start to look for waste and different improvement opportunities, engaging people that are, adjacent to the process. So if there's somebody out there that wants to get started with any type of, kind of operational excellence or start to work towards that, from my standpoint, it's not so much about engaging an expert, and that's really what you're doing if you engage somebody on this panel. I've spent more than 25 years doing this. I've made a lot of poor choices. I've learned a lot of hard lessons in those years, and so you are paying for that experience. All that said, what you can do on your own can be extremely impactful. And the best place to start is number one, having what the why is. What is the why of the organization? Why are we trying to operate with excellence? Why do we want to improve our quality? Why are we trying to improve our processes? Breaking all of that down for people, and then literally kind of, throwing yourself on the sword, if you will, from a leadership perspective, having a company-wide meeting and saying things like, look, here's where we're at. Here's where I'd like to go. Here's why I'd like to do this. Here's how I think we can do it together. And oh, by the way, I'm going to maybe make some mistakes. I'm going to maybe make some missteps. I'm looking to you guys to not only hold me accountable, but to help give me the ideas, give us the ideas if it's a large organization that you have multiple layers of leadership in there, but have those very candid, very real conversations with people, and then do two things beyond that. And this is where a lot of people miss. The two things that you have to do beyond that is support the ideas and get the hell out of people's way. Don't take 6 months to decide, well, boy, this is, boy, $1,000, $10,000, boy,
Right.
that's a lot of money, and meanwhile, you're literally burning through tens of thousands of dollars that you don't recognize. So those are the two things that you have to do. Stay the heck out of people's way, support that effort, and be ready to make change, because that's what will crush this stuff internally. You have like one opportunity when you have that conversation with people. You literally, in my experience, have one opportunity to come good on it. Otherwise, forget it. You might as well just relish yourself to say, this is where we're going to stay at. This is our lane.
And I would say, if I may comment on that really quick, Max, before I let you jump in, again, without mentioning any previous employers, I've seen where, those initiatives start with, a lot of fire in them and with, I would say, really good intentions. But in many instances, they become sort of like new metrics that we've implemented. And instead of empowering the people, they just, there's like reward systems that get put in place and people submit their ideas and they never see them implemented. So
Yeah,
the fire dies down pretty quickly, right?
But that is the problem. That's why I laid out what I did in the way that I did, Vlad, because it's really, in my experience, it's the why that's missing. People are doing it for the wrong reason. They're starting out with I want to increase profitability, but they're doing it in a backhanded way instead of just being upfront to say, look, I want to increase profitability because I'd really like to go into this new market. And to do that is going to require a significant capital investment. And in order to do that, we really need to improve our overall quality. We need to improve our efficiency and utilization. And so people go about it the wrong way. And when that message gets communicated out to people doing the work, they feel very slighted. And it's very difficult to get behind that message when you don't get the full picture. So it's about, communication, effective communication, and transparency. And if you do those things well, you could lead an army into victory. It's crazy what can happen in a very short amount of time with a very limited amount of resources.
I believe it. I haven't seen a transformation personally, I guess. So that's why I'm always a little bit skeptical based on what I've seen, at least in my experience. Max, sorry, go ahead.
So a couple of comments. So I agree with Dave. I actually have an experience. So I went into a company and it was a union environment, and the union and management was like fire and gasoline is the best way to describe it. And so they wanted to, to Dave's point, there's unlimited opportunities for making improvements. And so you got to start. So what I did is we did the value stream map. I took an area that was a big problem area. And what I did is I brought the team in and I said, okay, I just want you to complain about your job. So I let them complain about all the issues in their department. I just made a list on the board. And I said, okay, let's take this list and make a problem statement from this list. Right. And so they came up with a problem statement. I said, okay, I want you to think about solutions that can solve this problem. And go away for a couple of days, come back. And when they left, I said to the leadership team, whatever they suggest, we're implementing. I don't care what the suggestion is, because nobody's ever listened to them. And do you think if they come up with an idea, they're going to let it fail? No way.
Yeah, it's going to be, I want to prove a point. And to tack onto that, Max, I mean, I have seen multiple transformations, Vlad, to get to your point, where, but it really is a leadership buy-in situation and that support factor. And when you kind of, that's why I say, fall on the sword, so to speak, when you approach it in that method and, to Max's point, you engage those people and you start to listen, they know the roadblocks because they're literally dealing with them every day.
Yep.
And, it may have been a while since you've really been in the weeds with people and seen the things that they see on a consistent basis. And again, so often you talk to leadership and it's like, yeah, but Joe's jaded and he's been here for 30 years and we tried some of his stuff and he doesn't know. And it's like, well, but did you really? Did you really? And what was like your takeaway on what he was saying versus you intently listening and then peeling back the onion of what he was saying? And then, oh, by the way, how about we involve some other people to have, that input intermixed with other people that kind of touch the process? It's all of those little aspects that really go to ensure that kind of, sustainability and adoption that leads to the long-term transformation.
Absolutely. And if I may add on to that, so when I go and I talk to organizations, I guess mostly internally myself, I look at it, is it a complete turnaround situation? Are we gutting everything they have, building from scratch and starting over? And that's kind of one thing. And none of this would necessarily directly apply to that. But if it's not, and I would say the vast majority of quote unquote good organizations are stable organizations, right? We have people at the organization that should know the answers to these problems. And in that instance, I basically say, you pull together a group of people who know what they're talking about, and they have 90% of the answers that you're looking for, right? And the goal of the expert, the goal of the consultant is to get that 90% out to help add the 2 or 3% that they know and to figure out the 7 or 8% that is unknown in there. And that is the transformation process, right? So you can get 90% of the way there with the knowledge in a good room of people who actually care. It just boils down to the one, do we listen? And two, can we implement quickly enough to get some of those quick wins? And as soon as we turn around the oldest, the people who have been there 20, 30, 40 years, and if we can get them on our team, they're never letting anything fail, right? If we can get the people who have been there the longest to join our team, they're going to drive the entire organization forward, and they're not going to let the organization fail, because they are the pace setters of the employees. So I would say that is kind of number one. And back to Dave's other point, when I go in, depending upon what when I go in and have these conversations, depending upon what it looks like, yes, you could talk about these kind of in flowery language, or you could go say, hey, let's go do some calculations and calculate what it means to the profitability and to the bottom line, right? And even if it's just rough, some people will know, 1% additional throughput is $1 million a year or $5 million a year. And even if those are just rough numbers, and even if you're only saving a couple percent or adding a couple of additional percent, that's huge dollars to the bottom line for $5,000 or 10 grand or $100,000 to go ahead and implement these solutions. And that being able to show the additional profitability of not just now at this moment, but year over year is a very good way in order to get the rest of the C-suite bought in, especially on the financial side, and then you stop worrying about it. And then as soon as you have a project that is allowing you to increase profitability of your organization, then everything becomes much easier, right? When I talk about, projects that pay for themselves, that has got to be what you look for. And I want to throw out some great resources. So I know David on LinkedIn and potentially on his website, he talks a lot about different tools, different resources, different things. I'm getting a yes. So we'll go ahead and put the Crysler Club website on there. I know Max puts out weekly videos where he talks. Max is at, I don't know, he's got to be coming close to like 80 or 90 of these videos that he talks about different themes. And he did operational excellence. He did, I think, scheduling. I know he's coming out with a series now that is his own experiences. So you guys should absolutely check that out. Future state engineering. And then also all of the videos on his Vimeo that he posts at least once a week on LinkedIn. And then, as I said before, Max and I have an On the Shoulders of Giants show in which we talk specifically about this that you can find on the Manufacturing Hub network as well. So all of those are great resources Do you guys have other books or other resources that you want to go ahead and shout out while we're talking about these?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, as you said, Dave, the majority of the things that I create available, across social on my website as well. We've also kind of recently introduced our newsletter. So we're doing a weekly, call it System Saturday, basically a very quick, less than 5 minute. Every kind of newsletter is less than 5 minutes, one actionable system related tip each Saturday morning. So that's just another resource that is out there and available for people to consume. But yeah, any of the videos I post pretty much daily across social with videos and breaking down some of these things that we're talking about, both tactically and strategically. So.
Absolutely. Max, do you have any other resources? I know you are a resource in and of yourself, but
Yes.
do you have any other resources, either stuff you've made or books or otherwise, for people to take
I
a
think
look
it's a good opportunity to go to conferences. I know during COVID, a lot of conferences went to virtual, but there's so many good conferences you can go and learn from. So that's another great resource.
Yep.
And there's a lot of usually experts speaking at those conferences. So it's a huge learning opportunity.
Yeah, the
Absolutely.
top couple you could mention to look out for.
I know the Theory of Constraints is having one the end of October in Orlando, and then
I didn't realize that will be a good one.
What's the Manufacturing Excellence? They're having one in Dallas, also about the same time frame.
Seems like there's an opportunity to have a list of like manufacturing oriented conferences and a way to sort through them, but that's just food for thought in general. That's at least like how I feel right now. But maybe if I do want to throw in a question on the tool side, right? So again, being maybe like on the plant floor and looking back at my personal experience, you hear a lot about Lean Six Sigma tools. You hear about Kaizens, five Ys, 5S or 6S. You hear about all these different, I want to say, implementations of the system. Is there, and I want to say that in my at least experience, in many ways, an organization gets extremely excited when somebody pitches the idea of a new tool. There's a large meeting. Again, we all get behind, like, let's do root cause analysis. We're going to figure this out. And then, like 2 months later, it's not really producing what we expected. And again, I can get into the reasons as to why from like what I've seen, but maybe could you recommend like how do organizations master these tools? And at the same, maybe like thought, like, do you consult them in figuring out how to continuously, I want to say, like, get over the learning curve for some of those tools and implement it properly where they actually drive results? More of a
Easy
convoluted
question,
question.
Vlad. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but
Well, I told you they would get harder,
thing
right?
he asked us. Well, I was going to say, good thing he asked everyone to define operational excellence as the easy question to begin with.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so now we can just throw all of the tools and all of the systems thinking. Can we
Well-
perhaps break this up a little bit into like the theory of constraints and Lean and Six Sigma and all of that as like management philosophies? Can we talk about philosophies and then tools, Vlad? Because I think that's going to make this slightly less convoluted of an answer.
Well,
So-
I would like to take a stab at Vlad's question before we do that, because in my opinion, there is a very simple answer to what he asked. And we could definitely go convoluted, but I'd like to try to make it simple for everybody. And when I look at it, to me, it's not so much about the specific tool, because once you learn the value of each tool in terms of solving problem, that's kind of one issue. But let's set that aside. You really asked about the adoption rate and how do you impact that? And, we all have seen those types of things. And from that standpoint, to me, it is about getting quick wins and putting in the repetitions of utilizing the tools. It's not so much about having a textbook Kaizen, in my opinion. Some people will argue this. So this expressly is my opinion. It's not so much about having a perfect 6S execution or event. To me, it's very much about getting into the spirit of it, which to me speaks back to the culture that I brought up early on. What's our why? What are we really trying to accomplish here? And even if you get 20% out of that in the first go around, to me, that's a huge win, because you're engaging people, you are speaking into the culture piece, and ultimately you're going to have an impact on the profitability side. So I apply that same thought process regardless of the tool. That's what I encourage people to do that I work with. It's about what's the retention rate of utilizing the tool and then putting in the work, which means that leadership has to allow some flexibility and time to not only execute the tools, but to stay patient, because 9 times out of 10, they think there should be bigger progress made. And in my book, the win comes from going through the exercise. The more of those you do, the more wins, the faster you'll see the bigger results. It's all interconnected.
And I'd like to make a comment. And so the mistakes I see companies make, and it goes back to what Dave said earlier, is they deal with the effects, right? And it's like they see the effects, it's like, oh, let's apply this tool, but they haven't peeled back the onion and said, what's the real root cause? And if we can get to just that, let's peel back the onion a little bit and get to the root cause and apply the tool to the root cause. Now we're seeing leverage. So I think a lot of times we do these activities and we don't see the benefits. I mean, I worked at a large organization that everyone was a Six Sigma black belt. And so they're doing hundreds of black belt initiatives. And at the end of the year, they're like, oh, we had $55 million savings in black belt projects that we did this year. I'm like, wow, profit share is going to be great this year. It's up 55 million. Well, that didn't turn to profit. Well, what is it then? Right? It's paper, right? Calculations, no real results. And so I think, to the point, I agree with Dave. It's like, right, you can get some big wins, but you got to do the planning piece up front, understand where you want to apply, what you want to apply it. And my rule of thumb is like, the first initiatives that you do get big gains, right? Then you'll get the momentum.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting thought, Dave. Let me kind of finish that thought, I guess, and let you jump in just a moment. But it almost feels, or again, like this is what I've observed in many facilities, that something like a black belt in Six Sigma is almost like an exclusivity club rather than a collaborative environment, right? So they would run those initiatives by only the people who hold that designation versus trying to get everybody involved. And I think it's in a certain way like a missed opportunity, right? Because as like even David suggested, it really needs to involve those in the field who see the problem with their true eyes. And so I guess my point to the previous discussion is that it's hard to figure out how these tools fit in the organization, and sometimes they can almost not necessarily eliminate people from it, but kind of create their own barriers in their own way, right? Like inaccessibility barriers, so to speak. Dave, you had a comment?
Yeah, no, I think to David's point that no one on this panel is going to disagree. It's about applying the correct tools at the correct time. And the value of operational excellence is generally people who know more than just lean or more than just Six Sigma or an LSS black belt or something along those lines, right? So I think the value is having a broad and wide toolkit. Kind of to Vlad's original point, I see lots of organizations kind of churn through these initiatives, right? So every 2, 3, 5 years, it's TPM or it's TQM or it's LSS or it's Six Sigma, or we go to lean, or we do kind of any and all of these things, but we focus on something for 6 months or a year, then we kind of backslide, forget all of the tools, and then they're like, oh, why are we doing so terrible? Oh, lean's terrible. We need to focus on Six Sigma because we have a quality issue, right? Or we need TPM, or we need a particular company's branded flavor of whatever this is because this was a VP's, this is a VP's, what they want to do. Maybe they were a black belt in a former life, right? So it's one of those things. And so I see it is absolutely the correct tool for the correct job, and the value of bringing someone in is knowing what the correct tool is and is asking the right questions. The biggest downside that I see in many organizations is continuing to churn through these without taking the learnings that they need to take from a series of lean initiatives or a lean Six Sigma or a theory of constraints or kind of any of those things. And so that's where I see kind of a lot of the downsides in these is we forget by going through the trainings the things that we've learned in the last 20 years. And ironically, sometimes you come in and they're like, oh yeah, we did some of this work. Let me send you a slide deck from 1999 or 2001 that actually would solve this part of the problem. Oh man, I wish we realized that we've had this tool and these answers for 20 years, right? So I would say that that's kind of to Vlad's initial point of the whole smattering of all of the different theories and management styles and tools. It's very much the right tool for the right job, and the skill becomes understanding which tool or which system in order to apply to that. And Vlad, I want to continue this conversation, but we do have some people to thank. So we want to thank Phoenix Contact for sponsoring this theme and the entirety of the month of August. And as part of that, we are happy to announce that Solus PLC, Vlad and his group that we talked about earlier, has about a month ago launched the PLC Next course, right? And so the course covers how to get started with the platform, and maybe Vlad's gonna hold up his PLC Next that's currently on the floor. Oh, we've got it mounted, ladies and gentlemen. Karim didn't have one to pick up, and it was disappointing for all of our watchers the last couple of weeks. But no, so the course covers how to get started on the platform, to create the program flows, how to implement ladder logic, structured text, and function block based on the IEC 61131 standards, as well as external communication. So we've got the hardware configuration, the PLC Next Engineer OP, PLC programming, that software package, the OPC UA communication, the Modbus implementations. I know that we're coming out with some MQTT at some point in the future. And if you guys listened from a couple of weeks ago, PLC Next has the PLC 1000, which is the extension module, which turns the PLC Next into a Profi-safe controller. And we're going to commit Vlad to adding that to the course at some point in the near future, because I'm reading the ad and I can do that sort of thing. But no, go ahead and check out solusplc.com if you want to go ahead and get in that course. And again, we want to thank Phoenix Contact USA for sponsoring this theme and their continued support of the community. Vlad, throw it back to you.
I do want to discuss the technological aspects I want to say of operational excellence, but before we get into that, I want to also, go to our previous conversation where we kind of slammed the metaphorical Joe on the third shift, that's maybe not doing his part and has been for many years.
Joe,
I want to ask you, because I think I get this question a lot, right? Like, as an engineer in manufacturing, I go to the production floor and there's going to be techs or other engineers who are asking the question of, I'm looking to improve the process. I understand the process. I have, a list of ideas, and I'm having a really hard time getting buy-in from management. So I want to maybe also ask a broad question of, how would you consult someone on getting through to management that there are good things that we could be implementing, and perhaps people who are listening to us talk right now have new ideas or are reignited, so to speak, to go and make some changes. How do you recommend that they approach that situation? David, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I actually just created a video speaking exactly to this point. And from my perspective and experience, how I would guide that is, it really comes down to helping that person to present their idea in the form of data, because data just becomes too incredibly difficult to argue, even from a leadership standpoint. So the best way to do it is to gather the data, gather the facts, and present it in what I call a pretty specific framework. But what it really comes down to is just presenting the problem, the solution, what the return on investment ultimately ends up being. Like, that's an even simpler, a simpler version than what I put in that video. But to me, that's what it really comes down to, because a lot of times it's easy from a leadership perspective to think people are leading with emotion. And often they are because, just in general, humans are selfish. And so as, to cut through that, if you come prepared with data and data that you can't necessarily argue. So what I mean by that is, data that is you are able to quantify and have that discussion, and that is literally the best way, hands down, because if you don't get it from your immediate kind of leadership level, presenting that data to other leaders on that level and potentially even the next level up, again, you don't necessarily, I'm not recommending people sidestep their immediate chain of command, but I have seen situations where, there's a significant enough opportunity that those conversations need to be had. And the best way to do it is with data.
Max, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I agree with David. And actually, I have a specific buy-in process, how to get buy-in. And also, I talked with a lot of people about coaching up. So there's a way to coach up to your boss, right, without them realizing that you're coaching them. Okay, so there's techniques you can use. And I agree, we need the data and the whole buy-in process. That's a whole session in itself. So I actually have some videos on that. But, right, you got to get there. You got to take them through that process, and you got to speak with data, right? I agree with David there.
Maybe elaborating. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, I think these are, this is great advice. I'm going to share some hard learned knowledge that I've found in my career. Is sometimes you're never going to convince the people, right? Be it myself. So I've got a great story of a guy named Andrew. He and I worked together on a project very briefly, right? And so he had come from an end user, and he was one of just a very couple like process engineers, really smart guy. They were having autoclave or potentially furnace issues, right? And so they were having heating issues, and he spent weeks or months going and collecting all of the data, right? He extrapolated it out. He's like, this is what we need to do. It's going to increase quality by 20 or 30%, and it's going to solve all of these other issues. And it fell on deaf ears until they hired some exceptionally expensive consultants to come in, collect exactly the same information, offer exactly the same solution, and the rest of the company bought in on it because they felt more comfortable paying an outside person to come tell them the information than they did going and trusting the person that they had paid to do the job. That was actually part of the reason why Andrew left. Why Andrew left that, to the surprise of no one here. So I'm going to say, I think going to convince people, going to coach up, going to have a story that you can tell with data, all exceptionally good pieces of advice, as long as you realize that sometimes there's no chance that you're ever going to convince the person on the other side.
And I would recommend, if you're not good at, the coaching method, don't try to do it in a group setting. You'll get slaughtered, right? So practice one-on-one, practice with a coworker, right?
Yeah, that's great advice. The other thing I would say to kind of, Dave, to your point, is it can be equally powerful to learn that about your organization, right? And that becomes an individual situation or an individual choice, where when you recognize things like that, and that happened to me personally, so I can kind of speak to that experience. When the kind of, light bulb clicked that I was in a situation like that, I knew immediately that I was done there. And it took time to transition and all those things. But that, for me, I'll never forget that moment, because when I was having a conversation like that and that switch hit, it was like, wow, okay, well, this isn't the place for me anymore. So, it can be equally powerful. It can be equally powerful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I want to continue the discussion on data, and I think, bringing back the technology component that we mentioned at the end of the PLC Next introduction. So my thought is that, there's there's multiple train of thoughts when it comes to data. Some people want absolutely like every piece of data. Other people argue that we should only get very specific, metrics that we're looking to maybe implement through our systems and track. like what are your thoughts on the, I want to say, the current manufacturing readiness when it comes to data and operational excellence initiatives? And I want to maybe like make it a little bit simpler, right? Like when you go to a facility, do you typically see them have like too much data and it's unstructured? Do you see that there's not enough data to make the right decisions? Do you see that there's, no data at all? Like what are your general like thoughts? Like what do you see in the field, ideas, comments, horror
So
stories maybe?
I have a statement that I use. So when I go into companies, they have a sea of data, but no data I can see.
Hmm.
I love that. Oh, I like that one.
So I help them take that sea of data and turn it into data that they can see, because there's really, from a system perspective, there's very few points of data you need to understand how the system's performing. But if I don't know what those are, right, I'm just looking at all this data and all this noise, and I don't know what to do with it. I would say in most cases, people are collecting way too much data. That's my opinion.
Can you drill down a little bit more, Max, on the key points that you suggest? I mean, what are the key points in that scenario that people need to be collecting data on? Because I know that's a question everyone in the comments is going to be asking.
So I usually start with a key performance indicator. So what's the drivers for the business? And, I try to keep a few that are customer focused, a few that are internal focuses. To David's point earlier, it's like it's about serving the needs of the customer, but also serving the needs of the stakeholder, and then making sure that the processes that are supporting those are in alignment. If they're misaligned, that's where I see a lot of problems. And so I want to make sure that I understand what those key drivers are, and then I'm looking at the processes, the data they're collecting. A lot of times I see misalignment. It's like, well, all this data they're collecting, and then what I find is like a key piece of data I need is missing. So now it's like, now I can't do anything because it's like the one piece of data I need is missing.
Yeah. The other thing I would add to what Max was saying is what I like to encourage people to do is to try to find opportunities to create some lead indicators, so some lead KPIs, right? Because everybody's used to looking at what's already happened, yesterday's news, but to look for ways to identify things, to predict the future. And, the combination of those two things become extremely powerful. And, the more kind of, Vlad, I think back to where you were going with the technology standpoint, the more kind of advanced that you are from a manufacturing perspective, really any company perspective, but, to the structure kind of conversation, when you have things like ERP and access to that level of data and sophistication, and you are taking advantage of the kind of tools and data within those types of technology, it's a little bit easier to develop some of those lead KPIs for sure. And it's more readily available because you can get access to that data much, much faster than, kind of in some more manual fashions or in some other siloed kind of systems / technology.
I'm not familiar with the lead KPIs. Could you, I guess, like unpack that a little bit or give a few examples? What does it mean to
I
have a
actually
lead
have an
KPI?
example.
Okay.
Yeah, go fire away, Max.
So a lot of companies, when they look at their financials, like they look at, oh, how do we do last month? The end of the month syndrome. It's like we're trying to get the financials and then we look at how do we do? So today's the end of the month. So a lot of people are experiencing the end of the month syndrome.
Perfect timing.
Yep.
And they look at what they did last month. But the leading indicators, like what I look at is what's their current backlog? What's the future potential to get the throughput through the system? If my backlog is low, of course I'm going to have a poor financial performance because I don't have enough volume to meet the demand. So I'm looking at what's the backlog. That's an indicator of the financial performance of the company. That's a leading indicator.
So you're looking to predict next month's performance in a way?
Yes.
Is that the thought?
Yep.
So I would say, so we say leading, right? So leading is forward looking versus lagging. So lagging is looking
backwards
behind.
looking.
Yes. And so I feel like for anyone who's not familiar with the concept, we need to say most KPIs are lagging indicators, how we did in the past, not leading indicators, what we're doing in the future. And so if you're not familiar, the difference between the two, but you can continue, Max.
Yeah. So now I know if I have sufficient backlog and I can execute that, I'm going to have a good month.
Yeah, and with something like that, to kind of tack onto the point of how far into the future you can actually predict that, Vlad, when you have a sophisticated ERP system and you're used to running facilities based on data, um, you can drive it all the way down to the efficiency, utilization, and kind of resource allocation, down to the work center, because you have access to all of that. So when you talk about understanding what the potential of your profitability is for next month, when you have access to that level of sophistication within your system, which by the way is doable, had a lot of plants that we were doing this at daily basis. It is literally like predicting the future, and you can make decisions today that will impact your month end. So 15, 30 days out, I can make planning decisions that will impact my month end. That is the power of systemization and data. It's really amazing stuff when you tap into it.
Interesting. And my assumption is that you would need, I guess, like cultural buy-in as well from the people, right? To kind of transform maybe that train of thought of always looking behind, right? So there's maybe like an oversimplification that we're like discussing here, but probably a lot of effort takes place to kind of shift the mindset. Am I correct in
Yeah, I would
making that
say
statement?
95% of the data that people are looking is lagging, right? They're looking at past
Right.
performance. Nobody's looking
Yeah.
forward.
And the other thing I would add to that, kind of to that point, Vlad, like it's kind of one of the, I go back to one of the questions you asked a little bit earlier. It's how do you simplify these things when you maybe aren't that technologically advanced, right? Because a lot of manufacturers out there aren't. Well, you could do things by like monitoring what your inbound activity look like. Well, how many conversations is customer service having on any given day? And treat that as a KPI, as a lead KPI. I know if I'm having 20 conversations a day, chances are I'm going to convert 5% of
Yep.
those. Chances are that's going to result in a 3-week, turn time, which is going to hit my fine. You can play it all forward, but you have to be thinking about it from that kind of perspective, which is a different mindset than what most people do. Most people are used to just reading what's already happened and saying, man, we had another bad month. What the heck are we going to do this month?
Right.
And by the way, it's already the first, like you're already too late into this month. So
That's what I've observed many times for sure. But it's an interesting thought. Like I said, I've not seen it done that way, but I could certainly see the idea and the benefit to thinking more into the future.
So when we talk about KPIs like that, right? So it's very much organizational KPIs, and
Mhm.
typically, Vlad, when you and I are having conversations, we're talking about MES, or we're talking about SCADA, or we're talking
Sure.
about information, that data that we're pulling from PLCs to potentially feed into some machine learning in the future. These are much higher. These are much
Yep.
higher numbers, right? So some of those may matriculate upward into the KPIs, but organizationally, you need to have a core, 4, 6, 8, 10 KPIs that the organization is looking at. And in theory, so we've talked about in the past on this show of the CEO going and pulling up a dashboard on their phone to see how the organization is doing, to see if the facility is running, right? You're going to have that. But in theory, they really want to see those, 4, 6, 8, 10 numbers, and they see if all of those numbers are at the appropriate levels. They know that their facility is good today, and they know that their facility is going to be good next month and into the future. So that is kind of when we talk about KPIs, and the reason we have leading KPIs, that is very much at that. A lot of the technology and the points that we talk about on this show are very much kind of potential feeders into that, right? So we've talked about MES, we've talked about OEE, we've talked about manufacturing intelligence that leads into business intelligence that would bring us all around to what these KPIs look like. And it looks like David has a comment.
I do, Dave, kind of to that point, like where I've seen it be successful, I think in kind of the realm that you guys are typically talking is, from an IIoT standpoint, and let's say like preventative maintenance, right? Predicting when things are going to break down before they actually break down, and whether that's through cycle counts or, other types of monitoring information. But I think that's a great use case for thinking about lead KPIs from a more technological standpoint and IoT standpoint. And again, a lot of manufacturers are not that sophisticated, but we're heading in that direction. So there's definitely conversations that need to happen in that arena, and to get people's minds thinking about like kind of how exciting a lot of this stuff really is.
I want to go back, Max, to your comment on the data lake, right? Or data swamp, data. I guess that there could
Sea
be
of
many,
data.
Data
many
C.
data C, many synonyms to what you were mentioning. But I wanted to maybe discuss like how or what would be the steps to untangle that mess of data, right? Like when you come into an organization and you're faced with that reality, like how do you start, or is there a framework? Is there an approach? Is there like a thought? Like, do you have a predefined set of, like first KPIs and you list them out? Like, let's get that in place. Then here's like a sub maybe data point that leads to into this like each KPI. Like, how do you approach like figuring that out?
Yeah, so I always start with the KPIs, the higher level KPIs, and I call it like the vital signs, like for our own health, right? My temperature, my breathing rate, my heart rate, my blood pressure, right? Those are the vital signs. So I try to find those for the organization. So we start there, and then we start to look at the processes, like Dave was saying, that supports those, and say, okay, now let's put the measurements in place that support those KPIs. And typically those are, we start with KPIs and we start with critical success factors. In order to achieve these, we got critical success factors, and then we got some processes that support those. So we drive it down through the organization that way.
And so,
Yeah,
David, I guess do you have a comment?
Yeah, what I would add to what Max was saying is that, it's going to be kind of dependent on what the goals of the organization are. So it's kind of difficult to lay out. I mean, everybody knows revenue, gross profit, net profit, those types of things. But beyond the surface level and those, high level vital signs that will be typically similar across the board, you're going to have things where if an organization's kind of go to market is focused around quality, well, that needs to be a KPI. And then taking that one step further, what about quality is it? How is quality defined for that particular organization? Because what I've found is, as we start throwing around terminology, people have a different definition of it. So one person's quality metric does not equal another person's quality metric, because we could be talking about two very different things as they relate to quality. So I just wanted to make sure that that was pointed out, that, you can't just grab somebody else's KPIs because you're not building anybody else's business. It's very specific to your business and what you're trying to do in the marketplace and how that relates to your model.
And speaking of that last, I guess, like train of thought, so me and Dave in the past have had several discussions, I want to say, of, I guess, like two thoughts, right? Like, number one is having cross industry experience, right? So imagine consulting with maybe like a background in oil and gas, and you're going to observe a company that makes, I don't know, snacks or any like food and beverage product. So that's like question number one, like how do you think it's reapplicable across industries? But in that same, like I want to say, like train of thought again, is having an external versus an internal resource. And me and Dave discussed this in great detail, is that the thought is having someone with maybe like a fresher set of eyes look at the same problem that's been, there for years, decades, is a like huge benefit. So I want to maybe have a discussion around both of those points in no particular order. David, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think to your point, Vlad, I think having somebody external that maybe isn't necessarily industry specific can bring a different kind of light into, shed a different light on the problem, if you will. But that, in my opinion, has to be coupled with people that have, deep subject matter expertise. So, while I've spent more than 25 years doing these things, there are still going to be things, because I've not been in the weeds for, so long, and I'm looking at high level strategy and tactical things, right? you have to bring in that subject matter expertise at the line level, if you will, to, get a clear and full picture. So I think there is benefit to having people outside of the industry, fresh ideas. They've seen different technological advances. So if we're talking about technology, they've seen things implemented maybe in this particular industry that requires some advancement there versus maybe this other industry that can get by with, some more manual systems and processes. So I think there's value in engaging people that have a broad range of experience.
So I got a quick story about that. So I actually did a doctor's office. And so when they brought me in, the head doctor said to me, "So what's your experience in the medical industry?" I said, "Zero. That's why you need me." And he like stepped back. He's like, "Wow, I wasn't expecting that answer." And because I'm going to look at it from a different perspective, they're all looking at it from the same perspective. I'm going to look at it from a different perspective. And I had the same thing in an oil refinery. They're like, "What's your experience in oil refining?" "I don't have any." "You have PhDs on staff in oil refining. You don't need another oil refining expert."
Yeah. Yeah, I think you nailed it earlier, Max, with your with your quote in terms of, the system is perfectly designed for, for the results that it achieves in that situation because yes, you need somebody that has, can answer the questions that are close to the process, but you need somebody that knows what questions to ask in the first place. If you don't know what questions to ask, you're standing around asking the same questions. So,
and David, I wanted to get your opinion too on, because I see in organizations is like they have a certain level of knowledge, right? So then, of course, I saw that people can't do something that's beyond their level of knowledge. So organizations can get to a certain level, and then all of a sudden they get stuck, right? And they can't get past that. Now you got to bring in more knowledge. Do you have any comment around that?
yeah, I mean, it's kind of the opposite of the brains at turnover situations. Whether it's a first generation to second generation business, whether there's high levels of turnover due to negative events, it's to me it's the opposite of that brain drain, right? So same problem said a different way. And the reality of it is, having some systemization to build off of when you're going the other way versus that's the savior when you're trying to backfill. So that's, that would be kind of my experience with it. It one comes back to the systemization side of things. And then two, kind of to the point that we were just talking about, when you have reached a plateau in your organization, don't be afraid to look outside of that silo, maybe out of that vertical to bring in that fresh perspective. And I've seen some crazy things happen from a growth standpoint when you tap into the person that shares the vision and you have the base layer of systemization underneath that to build on. So I look at it from that, like same problem said two different ways. And the one thing that brings it all together is the systems. Just one way it's holding you up, the other way it's your base to build on further.
Dave, did you have a comment?
Yeah, no, I was going to agree with these as we've talked about systems, I'll say systems 7 more times in this comment just to really drive it home, right? But if you are coming in to go work on a system, if you look at a facility or facilities as a system, it doesn't matter if you're making peanut butter or refining gas or printing newspapers or making airplanes. Everything is a system. The intrinsic value that you bring are the tools that you have to go solve the problems and the questions that you asked. Back to my kind of earlier comment on good, stable organizations, which are the majority that I go in and work with, they have 90% of the knowledge. It's the person's goal coming in order to bring that knowledge out. As Max said, they have PhDs doing whatever in that. They have people who've been working there for 20, 30, 40 years. They're going to bring in maybe one person in the world that has more knowledge of that particular type of environment, but they're probably not going to be able to solve the problem because they're looking at that person would look at it from the 50 years they had of working at one very particular place, as opposed to let's look at everything in a system, come in with fresh eyes, as has been described, and go kind of drill down to the actual root of the problem. Because again, most of those people have the answers trapped within them. They just don't know they have it, and they don't know how to bring it out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Dave. I want to, as we maybe continue or wind down the conversation, as we're already past the hour, I want to ask kind of like a fundamental slash like training question, right? So we've mentioned a couple of resources in the middle of the discussion, but if a listener, again, this could be someone coming in from like a plant standpoint, and maybe they're realizing that we need someone who's good at operational excellence, and perhaps they want to train somebody internally, or maybe someone who's listening in who's in engineering or a technician and wants to learn more about how to maybe apply some of these methodologies. Like, what are your recommendations, or when of how they could most effectively train themselves? And this could be, again, maybe like a couple of books I think would be interesting. I know like your websites certainly have a lot of information as well, but also maybe like in-person trainings that someone maybe willing to invest in would be interested in as well. Any thoughts, David, Max?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so what I'm trying to do,
yeah, go ahead, Max.
one of my core things is to be able to train people, right, and be able to have them apply the training. So I do a lot of training where it's hands-on. So we do the theory and then we do the application in their business. So it's not just me talking, it's actual application. I walk them through the process. That's why I do the videos. I actually working with a college now to do online courses. And there's tons of information in YouTube, right? It's like there's so much free information out there. It's like you just got to take the time, and it's like don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's like don't get analysis paralysis, right? Don't try, like, oh, I'm not ready to implement yet. Try implementing, right? That's how I got my experience. It's like I failed so many times. It's like, well, don't do that again, right? And then try again.
Yeah, so true, Max. I share a lot of those bruises with you. So, yeah, I mean, you know, there's tons of stuff available on YouTube. Kind of, tack on to Max's sentiment there. If you're talking about books and things to just kind of learn in general, whether we're talking about quality management, kind of lean management, like all things under the sun, operational excellence. One of my favorite resources is ASQ. They have a tremendous website, so asq.org. Tons of free information on there as it relates to quality management. You can obviously become a member. They have a LinkedIn group that's really great. There's a Lean Six Sigma group on LinkedIn that is also really good, full of a lot of resources. Book wise, Max, you mentioned, being trained under, Gold Rat. I mean, that book, series of books is amazing. The goal, there's so many, to me, it comes down to like, what's the medium you enjoy learning the most? Because there's tremendous podcasts, there's tremendous YouTube channels, there's tremendous books, there's tremendous online courses. Find the medium that speaks to you and that you feel like you gain the most out of. And then to Max's point, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Get your hands dirty and go through the iteration. The practice is much more important than the flawless execution. That stuff comes later, and you will see marginal improvement the more times you just try. So I think that's a good place to stop. There's tons and tons of resources out there for free and paid, wherever you want to go.
And I would recommend getting a mentor. I mean, the
Great
mentors
advice.
I had were Dr. Goldrat and Dr. Deming, but most
But,
of those videos and
you
stuff I
can settle
learned.
for one of us,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, Max isn't going to name drop on
That's
this
hard to
episode,
follow,
thankfully.
man. Jeez, OP.
Yeah, so yeah, you should just be Max and have two of the smartest people to ever write on this subject as your mentors. Thank you, thank you for that, Max. That was really
No,
easy.
so I have one more bit of advice. So when they say things, right, just don't listen to what they're saying. Understand what they're trying to, the message that they're getting across, because they can say one statement and it's so deep, right, that you got to step back and say, what is he trying to say to me?
I think all of those are really good. I would say, to kind of add on to that, and I think we've discussed it a bit, but go take those things that you learn either through YouTube or through reading or through forums and blog posts, and go find ways to utilize those in your everyday life. So we talked a little bit about process mapping and value stream mapping. I think that that's some low-hanging fruit for many facilities, that you can go walk through your facility to try to understand the flow of everything. And that is one, easy to do. You can do it in parts. It's going to force you to talk to a bunch of different people as part of your organization. And then you're going to go see, issues and bottlenecks and other potential ways to go improve the facility as you go through that. So late 90s through mid 2000s, value stream mapping was like all the rage, right? There were people who would come in and do week-long seminars just on value stream mapping with management facilities, or with managements in there. And that was kind of the whole value prop, is we're going to go do value stream mapping. We're going to find ways to increase profitability. So tons of great tools out there on value stream mapping and everything else. And then, because Max and David won't, I was going to say, you guys can go check out Future State Engineering, go check out the Crysler Club. I'm sure both of these guys would be happy to have conversations with you, if you're geographically close, or otherwise, on ways that they can go help you, either in the short term or in the long term, as part of as part of what they do all day, every day. I know for a fact that Max has, like, I don't know, 400,000 hours worth of PowerPoint trainings available to himself. He spent years of his life dumping all of that out on PowerPoints, and he will murder you on any particular topic if you want to sit in the if you want to sit there, and he will just go ahead and talk you to death in both a good and potentially a slightly bad way, because people would be dead with that. But I know we are getting close. Vlad, I'm thinking we go have final thoughts, and allow everyone to go around and give final thoughts, or any feedback or suggestions. Are you good with that?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. David, you get to be up first. Do you have any final thoughts or suggestions? Do you have any final thoughts or suggestions?
Yeah, I think when, I kind of play back the conversation that we had, which was tremendous, by the way. So thank you guys so much for, inviting me on here and letting me be a part of this. Had a ton of fun with you guys. So yeah, but when I think about the conversation, I think there's some different themes there. And when I think about it as it relates to the topic, don't be afraid to just get started, and don't be afraid to just get started with the tools that you have. If you don't have access to a lot of data, it's okay to use pen and paper. If you don't have access to a fancy tool that helps you do process mapping, it's okay to literally use sticky notes and a whiteboard. It's actually my favorite way to do it. Don't be intimidated by the techniques, by the tools. As I've said many times, if you need a hammer, go get a hammer, right? It doesn't matter if it's a Craftsman or a Snap-on. They still both hammer. So, don't be mesmerized by all of those types of things. Understand where the problems are, engage your folks. They know where the bodies are buried. Start asking questions, and be prepared to spend a little money, implement the things that they are suggesting, and do it as literally as fast as you can. Get the results, review, revise, repeat, right?
I like that.
Beautiful.
Max?
Thank you.
Yeah, so my advice is, it's a mindset change. So I've never met David. This is the first time I met him, and I'm surprised how like-minded we are, right? And so
I had to read the books, just so you know, Max. I didn't get the first-hand education. I had to just read the books. So
and so it's about mindset. So do the education, right? Understand the concepts. Again, get a mentor if you can, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Like, just jump in. It's like, yeah, you need to learn how to get buy-in, but there's stuff out there to teach you to do that. And there's unlimited opportunities for improvement in organizations. You just got to start somewhere.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think all of these are fantastic, fantastic points. Vlad, do you have any thoughts before I ask Dave and Max to tell people where to find them, and then we say goodbye?
I would say, an interesting thought was the conversation we had around the managing like upwards. I think that I've certainly found myself in a position where I couldn't clearly articulate, a good solution maybe. And so that's, I think, something that a lot of people are working on. And so I'm like curious about the materials that both of you have mentioned in that area. But overall, I mean, like there's a lot of very interesting points and certainly a lot of information to explore across the board.
Absolutely. I would say all of these are good points. There is certainly lots of things for everyone to learn. I would say speed is exceptionally important when it comes to any of these. And even if you don't have the best buy-in when you go to start some of these, transformations, when you go to start some of these mindset shifts, a couple of quick wins, as I think both Dave and Max have mentioned, are going to start to change the mindset of the people that you work with. And if you can get the quick wins, the organization will change, whether it intended to in the beginning or not. But no, I think that's fantastic. Dave, will you let everyone know where to find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. My biggest social platforms that I'm active on are LinkedIn and Twitter. You can find me by searching my full name, David Chrysler, and then on our website, which is thechrysler.club. And an important note, my name has no H in it, like the car. So spelled Crysler, a common misconception.
Absolutely. I would like thank you for clarifying that. Every time I go to search for Dave on LinkedIn, I absolutely spell his name incorrectly with an H in it the first time, and then I'm confused why I can't find him. So Chrysler with no H for the Chrysler dot club. Thank you, Dave. Max, tell everyone where they can find you, please.
Yeah, so my main platform is LinkedIn. So just search for me on LinkedIn, Max Krug. Also, we got a company, what our page on LinkedIn, Future State Engineering. We have our YouTube channel where I post videos, Future State Engineering, and feel free to email me. You can email me right from the website, put in your information. I do a weekly email with tips and ideas. So if you want to get on that weekly email, just send me your information.
Absolutely. No, I would say if you guys are not connected to them and are watching this live, please feel free to go ahead and connect. They're both a wealth of knowledge, and I'm always happy to see their videos and other things as I go through. But no, with this, Vlad, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub, and everyone, thank you for joining us. If you have made it this far, please feel free to go do the like and subscribe things. If you're listening on podcast form, please rate us 5 stars, hit the subscribe and the follow. We launch new podcasts every Thursday. We used to do it every morning, but now we can commit to the day of the week. So we launch new podcasts every Thursday, which is the audio format of these great videos. And then as you guys are doing that, please feel free to subscribe to the Solus PLC YouTube channel and go check us out on manufacturinghub.live. Again, a huge thanks to Phoenix Contact for sponsoring this month of August and all of these amazing conversations. If you guys have thoughts or feedback on these roundtable formats and are enjoying them as much as we are, or absolutely hate them, I suppose we'd love feedback both ways. Please feel free to drop Vlad and I a line. You guys can find us, Vlad at Solus PLC, me at kaplan.io, and you guys of course can find us kind of all of those places. Feel free to drop comments, let us know what you think, and we'll see everyone live next Wednesday afternoon. Until then, thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David. Thank you, Max.